time, I had a friend of mine, Tom Campbell. He was a member of Congress. He later ran for Senate and is now in California. But he brought a lawsuit against Clinton, arguing it flouts the War Powers Resolution. It's a usurpation of congressional authority. He lost the case on standing. That is, the U.S. courts have said individual members of Congress cannot challenge usurpations of the institution's loss of authority. Only the institution could bring the lawsuit. And therefore, that passed not because the courts ratified the Bosnia War, but because that we are not going to entertain the challenge by a single member of Congress. And the same thing was done with regard to Kosovo. President Clinton intervened. There was no authority from Congress. People shrugged their shoulders. Well, what does it matter? And we should not then be surprised about the continuing escalation, if you will, aggrandizement of presidential authority to initiate war, which again, it's reached its meridian in 236 years, President Obama in Libya. If we think about the Afghan war after 9/11, President Bush did get an authorization to use military force from Congress. I think it's been vastly overreached because the authorization is limiting to fighting war against those who were involved in 9/11 or had harbored, past tense, those involved in 9/11. And our presence in Pakistan is not geared to those who were in fact involved in 9/11 or harbored them. We're killing more in Pakistan, Pakistani Taliban, because we're worried about the nuclear armaments of Pakistan falling into extremists than we are those who are implicated in 9/11. But in any event, at least we went through the facade of getting congressional authority. With regard to the Iraqi war resolution, this is really a carbon copy of the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, because Congress itself did not decide on war against Iraq. There was just a delegation to the president. If you think it's appropriate to fight a war against Saddam Hussein, go ahead and do it. And then we have the slam dunk euphemisms and the wrongful, flawed intelligence about weapons of mass destruction that we ended up in Iraq, and whether or not when we extricate ourselves finally it will fall into partition or civil war, which seems overwhelmingly likely, is a different question than whether or not Congress had properly exercised its prerogatives when it gave to President Bush, based again on faulty information, the authority to enter war. Now, after that, I had drafted, at the request of Representative Walter Jones, a Republican North Carolina, a bill called the Executive Accountability Act. There are a couple of hearings on it. And it would have the revolutionary notion that a president commits a crime when he tells a knowing lie. He knows it's a lie to get Congress to authorize war. Now, it's really a sad commentary on our government. You have to have a law to tell the president not to tell not an inadvertent lie, a knowing law to Congress to get us into war. For example, making up the fiction that Iran has now got an arsenal of 500 nuclear weapons and delivery vehicles. If that's known to be a lie and you make that statement in order to initiate war, that really is not something that is tolerable in our rule of law constitutional dispensation. But, you know, the statute didn't go anywhere. And then we come, sort of say, to the high watermark of empire and usurpation is President Obama. You know, the more things change, the more they stay the same, as the French say. The more Obama pledged he was going to change things, the more he's imitated his predecessors. And with regard to the situation in Libya, the president decided he would initiate war because it was necessary to save civilian lives who otherwise might perish at the hands of Colonel Gaddafi. And he issued what you might call his white paper that tried to explain on what constitutional authority did he initiate the war. And it's issued by the Office of Legal Counsel. I once worked there, sort of the notorious dwelling of John Yoo, claimed when we're at war the president is limited by any laws. And his Office of Legal Counsel said, presidents have authority. Again, it's what's so conspicuous about the memorandum, to interrupt, is it never even quotes a single word of the Constitution. The president has authority to initiate war in the name of regional stability, the credibility of the UN Security Council, or otherwise if he thinks it's in the national interest. And Congress has now disappeared like a Cheshire cat. But it doesn't even have a smile lip, just maybe sort of a scorn. It's not even make a cameo appearance in the decision-making process. It is not, this is the most Orwellian interpretation of the Constitution since 1984. You know, when the Ministry of War was the Ministry of Peace and vice versa. You know, what happens? You know, there are a little bit of grumbling on Congress. They do hold some oversight hearing. They ask Defense Secretary Gates, are we at war? And if another country dropped a Tomahawk missile in New York City, would be at war. He says, yeah, I guess we are. Because there were claims made, no, these are sort of friendly encounters with the Predator drones in Libya, and as long as you kill people from the air, you're not at war, which is absurd, and that Secretary of Gates said that's an absurd argument to make. And indeed, think of the idiocy of the argument, even with regard to our own soldiers. Because what is the earmark of war? It makes what is ordinarily murder legal. It makes what's ordinarily murder legal. And so if you're not at war, we're committing murder for all those people who are dying, or otherwise. Because war is the legal architecture that enables you knowingly to kill people. So they don't want to push the analogy too far. And not only that, the Defense Secretary said, Libya has no vital interest in the United States. He sort of didn't know why we were there. And I say that's the earmark of empire, is fighting aimless or objectless wars. That is, wars where you can't even define what victory is. You know, and this is Richard Holbrooke, before he died, was saying, what are victory in Afghanistan? It's like how the Supreme Court once, through Potter Stewart, defined obscenity. We'll know it when we see it, but otherwise we can't tell you. And just think how, and I'm reluctant to use the word, this is obscene. You're sending our brave women and men to fight, to give that last full measure of devotion to a goal you can't even define. You can't even define it, and then you're going to build a wall 30 years later, say they died. For what? For what? And that's what the Founding Fathers repudiated. They said that's exactly what they did not want the United States to be. Because their experience was seeing monarchs and emperors and empresses fighting wars just for their own aggrandizement and causing and squandering lives of those who they viewed as their vassals or plebeians. This wasn't to be the United States of America. And now where are we? We're at the empire. Now, there's been no previous empire that's ever resisted the temptation to try to dominate the world. They want to bestride the world like a colossus. Remember Julius Caesar? At least Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. The actual one was maybe even worse when he crossed the Rubicon. But in any event, all have succumbed to this temptation. The United States is unique only because our founding documents and creed utterly reject this conception of national grandeur. Again, the glory of a republic is freedom, not domination. That's the glory of the empire. That was the fighting creed of the Founding Fathers, the band of brothers who were giving a mark on the history of mankind. And they understood that, the first experiment in democracy in history. And here we are at this crossroads now with Libya. Libya is the final crushing example of how, if you can go to war in Libya, the presidents will win. Think of all the other countries in the queue. Chad, Sudan, Iran, Burma, over Tibet, South Ossetia. I mean, it's endless.
How about Mexico?
Well, sure, Mexico's just one. Of course, you can go there, you can go in Bolivia, anywhere in the world. Regional stability. I mean, you could probably attack the Antarctica because the penguins and walruses aren't getting along right now. To disturb scientific investigation into global warming. I mean, that's how broad and elastic these terms are. And so we caricature, they become subjects of caricature, and that's a real tragedy. These are serious issues that need to be dealt with in a serious way. So how does this get changed? How does history turn? You know, sometimes 1848 was supposed to be the turning point in history. All the monarchs were supposed to tumble, but it didn't turn.